Welcome to the Lucas Rockwood Show. I'm a yoga trainer, I'm a serial entrepreneur, I'm a nutritional coach and a father, but first and foremost, I'm a student, and more than anything, what makes me tick is just learning. And so this show is about me scratching my own itch to learn. And I go out and find people mostly in health and wellness, personal growth and development, mindfulness, biomechanics, and I try to bring their best research, their best thinking to you to hopefully help you live a more inspired, more fulfilling life. That's kind of what I'm always trying to do. Not always succeeding, but always trying. On this week's show, we're talking to Rob Greenfield, who's a recurring guest. He was on the show a couple of years ago. At that time, he was walking around New York City carrying all of his own garbage on his body for 30 days. So by the end of it, he was looking sort of like a Michelin man filled with garbage. Interesting experiment. He was just trying to bring awareness to the fact that we're consuming ridiculous amounts of packaged foods, creating ridiculous amounts of waste. And he does these experiments to really just shine a light on what's really going on, the things that we hide from ourselves, rubbish being one of them. In this show, we'll be talking about what he's been doing for the past year, which is growing and foraging all of his own food. And I don't mean dumpster diving, although he has done that quite a bit in the past as well. But by growing, literally gardening, urban, suburban gardening, and also foraging, meaning fishing, roadkill, acorns, acorn grubs, which are bugs that come out of acorns apparently. That's news to me. And all kinds of other weird foods that you probably never heard of. Obvious stuff like finding coconuts and apples, but much less obvious stuff like insects and strange wild yams and things like this. And the question comes up is, Lucas, why do you have all these crazy people on the show? Why do you have guys who do 50 Ironmans in 50 days? Why do you have people who are starving themselves and water fast? Why do you have people who lock themselves in monasteries for 30 days at a time? Why do you have guys, trying to live off of an urban garden and eating roadkill? And I guess part of it is it's my personality. I am also drawn to these extremes. And I think more than anything is just to try to break us from these patterns that we fall into. And interestingly, right now, even though we have access to more information than ever, I find most people's information funnel is really, really limited in terms of the information that's coming through your feed, whether it's your news feed, whether it's your social media feed, whether it's your email inbox, or even your conversations. Somehow it's easier than ever to isolate, and it's easier than ever to just have the same conversations that just take you deeper and deeper down a radical rabbit hole. And I think it's important to entertain different ideas, even if they seem totally out in left field and totally crazy, which for many people living off the land for a year would feel completely crazy. But of course, it's the most basic thing in the world if you think about it, and there's probably some huge takeaways that you can learn from it. At the very least, growing some mint in your windowsill, planting some tomatoes around your backyard if you have one, or figuring out a way to start foraging wild mushrooms, which I'm hoping to do here in Catalonia this season. As you're listening, if you have questions or comments, or if you'd like to be featured on the show, email me podcast@yogabody.com. Your questions and feedback are most welcome. If you'd like to support the show, the best way is to share it. Share it on social media, take a screenshot and tag me. It's at Lucas Rockwood or at Yogabody. I appreciate your support and I appreciate you listening. So hello and welcome everyone, Lucas Rockwood here. Today's show is called A Year Spent Growing and Foraging Your Own Food. I'm here with Rob Greenfield, who's a returning guest on the show. Rob's an adventurer, an environmental activist, a humanitarian. He's on a mission to create a more sustainable and a more just world. He's done a whole bunch of interesting life experiments, adventures and human experiments. He's cycled across the U.S. a couple of times, hitchhiked from Panama back to the U.S. In fact, if I remember correctly, Rob, I think he hitchhiked from a couple of places in South America back to the U.S. He wore his own garbage for 30 days, which is an interesting project as well. And for the past year, he's on month 11 or 12 of growing and foraging every single thing he puts into his mouth. And he's looking. I checked out his Facebook profile. He's still alive. He's looking pretty healthy, pretty filled out and stuff. So he's not starving, which is a surprise to many people. So while you're listening, you can learn more at robgreenfield.tv. So not .com, but .tv. robgreenfield.tv. Rob, welcome back on the show.
It's great to be here with you, Lucas. Thanks for the wonderful intro.
So you're not starving. That was my first thought. When I've done a bunch of weird extreme diets, and there's a bunch of pictures of me with pretty much cheekbones, and I was down to, at one point I think it was down to 139 pounds when I was eating just bananas or something like that. But you're looking healthy, man. You're looking pretty supple. So how are you staying in terms of fed over the past year?
Yeah, well, that was really the goal of this project was not just, I mean, I wanted to see, is it possible in 2019 in our Western society where we're just so focused on convenience, food and comfort food, is it possible to actually grow and forage 100% of your food without grocery stores, without restaurants, and really connect to my food. And I didn't know if it was possible. This was an immersion, an experiment, and I'm happy to say today's day 338, and I haven't lost any weight. I'm just a month away from finishing, and I'm about the same weight as I was when I started, which for me is a great gauge of I obviously got enough food.
Yeah, and I've seen your pictures too, and you look healthy. And what I mean by that is you'll see, here in Barcelona, I'll see homeless people who are overweight, but clearly they're living off of, Coca-Cola or alcohol or biscuits or whatever comes out of the bakery, and you're looking supple and healthy as well too. So is that the case, or have you just snapped good selfies, or how are you feeling in terms of energy and stuff like this?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely healthy. I have had my it's an entire year, so it's had its ups and downs. There was a period in the middle where I felt like I was pretty deficient in protein and fat, and I felt like I had just lost almost all of my fat. But I brought that back up, and I just did a body fat composition, and it's 15%. So I have enough fat on my body. And at the end, I will do a test to just look at, just a basic health checkup and blood work to give that comparison, because those are things that I can't see. But as far as I can tell, I'm just as healthy as I've ever been, or possibly healthier. I'm, really happy, and I've been full. Right now, I'm working with intermittent fasting, which has been really nice. Just trying to eat between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. basically. So yeah, I mean, I've been comfortable enough that I'm actually able to be doing that. It's by no means been survival, but it's not always been thriving either. I've definitely struggled. It has been an extremely challenging year, but I think it's safe to say I'll be walking out of this healthier than when I started.
Cool. I really appreciate your commitment with all of these projects, and the reaction that you often get from people is that's so dangerous. And I think, well, what's really dangerous is just doing nothing and blindly going through your life. And I don't see the odds of that being very good either, whether it's health or creativity or engagement in your life. I don't see like mindless following of the herd being very safe. I think people feel like everyone's doing it, so it's safe. But there's this W. Clement Stone quote, which I love. He's like the father of personal growth and development. His thing is, if you look at what everybody else is doing and do the opposite, that's like, if in doubt, if you want to be successful, look at what everybody else is doing and do the opposite. And I think it's it's really telling, because if everybody is eating from the center of the grocery store, if everybody is eating, really what people eat is chicken, pigs, cows, wheat, corn, rice. I think I got them all. I think that's about all it is. A couple of them, there's a couple of other cow stuff and a couple of other chicken stuff. Or you get cheese and eggs and dairy and stuff like that. But it's not like people have this idea they eat a lot of foods. They just totally don't. It's chicken, pigs, cows, corn, wheat, rice, and sugar. And that's like really it. That's it. And then once in a while they have some asparagus, like, at Thanksgiving dinner or something like that. And so that seems pretty risky. This is like a global 7.5 billion people experiment that we're on right now, and just because it's a mass experiment doesn't mean it's not wacky, because that's crazy. That's a crazy idea to have mono crops and mono animals and mono agriculture. So I really appreciate your commitment to this. I've done a bunch of funky things in my life. I ate just raw food for 2 years, really wow. Strictly. I gave up garlic and onion for I don't even know how many years. I did intermittent fasting. Something like 3 or 4 years straight, like really strict. I would eat between 10 and 3 p.m. And now I'm on year 17 of eating just plant-based, which is the most committed. I have this problem with overcommitment in life. It's everything good in my life has come from overcommitment, and every time I've gone off the rails, it's because of overcommitment. But I just kind of committed to this thing in my early 20s, and I'm 41 now. It's kind of bonkers, and I've still been doing this thing. And I guess the challenge that I have is like you had quite a bit of insight. You said you had up days and down days. People ask me now, how do you feel and how are you doing? I have no reference, right? I don't remember. It's just been too long. Last time I ate like chicken wings, I was a teenager. Like, it's so long ago. I don't even know if I'm better or not. I know my blood work looks good. I know my DEXA scan looks good. I know that, objectively, I'm a pretty well adjusted person. But it's really difficult, it's really difficult for me, at least at this point, to gain some perspectives. But it's been a really long, lonely journey. At one point I had a whole group of friends, and I had a restaurant, and I had a girlfriend. People were on this path with me, but slowly but surely they all kind of drop off, which I'm sure has happened to you over the course of this year. I'm sure there's not that many people who want to eat, wild yam or whatever, or roadkill or whatever you've been digging at. But for whatever reason, I felt like this has been really important for me in my life's work, and I haven't really figured out why yet. But my whole thing is I want to be a future. I want to be part of the future of food, and chicken, pigs, cows, wheat, corn, rice, sugar. I'm convinced that's not it. And I'm just obsessed with this every day. The fact that we're all participating in a system that's fundamentally antiquated, broken, wrong. And the solutions that people are coming up with are not right. Now, I haven't come up with a good solution either. I'm not convinced that your solution is right either, because I can't do it. Most people can't do it. But I bring all this up in the context because I know that you don't go through a year of this kind of commitment without thinking about these kinds of things as well, too. And so what are your thoughts? You've invested a whole bunch of time and made pretty massive sacrifices and changes in your life for this project. What are your thoughts in terms of the future of food and the future of our agriculture and food systems?
Yeah. So, I'll first say that I don't consider my project a solution. My goal isn't for anyone to grow and forage 100% of their food. I do, these sort of extreme tasks because what I do is I'm creating a counter narrative to the mainstream narrative that's out there. It's like you were saying, basically the way that I look at it is, normal is just seeing the same thing over and over and over around you. And it doesn't matter how out of the norm something is. If you see that same thing over and over, it becomes normal. So everything that we're currently, the societal normal way of doing things, it seems normal to everyone, but it's not normal at all. It's not normal compared to 99.9% of human existence, compared to all the other ways that other species interact with their surroundings. There's really nothing normal about Western consumerism. So I try to stand out against Western consumerism to kind of shock people and to get them to stop and self-reflect and think about, wait a sec, is this food that I'm eating what I want to be eating? Is this good for me? Is this good for the planet? Is this, does this work with the other species we share this earth with? And then start talking about solutions. So for me, my hopes with this, I want to inspire more people to grow, just a little bit of their own food, even if it's just one, the little herb garden on their balcony, or some tomatoes and basil, or maybe a raised bed in their front yard. Because to see food start from a seed and grow into your food, it really can be a revolutionary thing. But also, it's one of the more sustainable ways of doing it, local without the fossil fuels. So that would be one thing. And then another thing is we don't have to grow our own food necessarily. We can support local farmers. So going to the local farmers market, supporting grocery stores that actually sell local food and get food from the local farmers would be another big one. And then other things are, less packaged processed foods. So more whole foods that are in the shape they were when they come from the ground. More plants, the average person would benefit from way more fruits and vegetables and grains and nuts and less animal products. For the average person, that would be pretty beneficial. And then, of course, just generally regenerative agriculture that's, not pesticide and heavy fertilizer oriented, and instead is based on working with the land instead of against it. So to me, it's ultimately pretty basic stuff we're talking about, and it's about adapting those pretty fairly basic things, but of course are revolutionary compared to our current way of doing things.
I guess where I get stuck is like it's really clear to me what's not going to work, but it's really not clear to me what is going to work. And the pushback I get from people also doesn't make much sense. So I talk to tons of smart people on this show, ancestral health people, PhD researchers, environmentalists, and they just like, a lot of it is really this idealistic thinking that we're going to go back to agrarian society where everyone will have a chicken, a pig, and a cow. And I can't see any evidence that that's happening. That hasn't been what's happened for the past 100 years. There's a move to urbanization. Population's growing. We're going to blossom to like 9 billion people or so. I just don't see it happening. I love the idea. I love growing stuff. I love the idea of having my own chickens and all this kind of stuff. If I had my own chicken, my own farm, I'd probably even eat meat. I mean, all these things sound great, but I don't see it. And so I guess what I really keep talking to people about, which is extremely unpopular, is this idea that the way forward is through all the stuff that we're scared of and that we hate, which is processed foods, genetic engineering, genetically modified. For example, let's say that rice had the protein density and protein profile of beef. And let's say it was rich in fat-soluble vitamins like A, K, and D. And let's say it was just as cheap as current white rice. That would be amazing. That would be really amazing. And that means we have to take some risks in the same way that you took a risk eating roadkill and you took a risk living in a mini house and turning off But nobody wants to have that conversation because I'm not sure why, but it's something that I think we need to think about is going both ways. It'd be great. We always need that ancestral model, and we always need that as a reference for the ideal, but the ideal is gone. It's just gone. You take a look at the satellite photos. It's a different planet. It just isn't. It isn't what it is. I wish my body was what it was when I was 20, but it's not. It's different. The planet's different. So people are really. I get mostly hate when I bring up these ideas of GMO foods, of frankenfoods, of super crops and things like this. But I feel like it has to be the way forward because we've done a really good job of ending hunger and poverty. It's getting eradicated crazy fast around the world. And now obesity is a bigger problem than hunger. And what we've done is basically airdropped in this crazy dwarf wheat, and we've airdropped in all kinds of funky hybridized rices and things like this. Simple starches have fed the world, and now the world is getting fat. Now the world is getting sick. And the next idea is, how can we have the top 10 foods be really nutrient dense and not just calorie dense? How can we have there be this complexity of nutrient density in foods without rolling back the clock and wiping off 4 million people, which inevitably I feel like that's kind of the suggestion when I talk to these ancestral primal paleo people, this idea that they're going to be fine because they buy $40 a pound wild-caught salmon and they get grass-fed beef, which 5 of the world's 7.5 billion people don't have access to. How do you think about this in terms of the future? I know there's quite a lot of questions in there, but it's kind of a depressing outlook when the future sounds like the Jetsons with these kind of ancestral farms as reference. But I can't figure out any way forward that doesn't look like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't shy away from this conversation at all. It's a conversation I very much like to have, and I think it's really important to actually be realistic. I am not idealistic at all. I can see where some people might think I am by looking at my work, but the reality is when you go deeper, I'm not really remotely idealistic. So, and we're talking about, solutions. When it comes to solutions, one of my beliefs is there is no one-size-fits-all solutions, and that in order for the Earth to continue and for humanity, in order for humanity to continue on Earth, one thing we need is diversity. All of our biomes only exist because of diversity, our millions of species. I don't see an Earth existing without that. So that means solutions are going to be different in different biomes and different climates and such. Now, I actually don't believe that the human race is going to be able to create solutions that are long-term, that are going to hold together humanity as we know it. So I actually don't come at this all as how does this save the 7 billion and allow for the 9 billion? Because I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. It may or it may not. And then another aspect of it is that one thing that I see as a central theme to humanity is we think we solve problems, but what we do often when we solve one problem is we create more problems elsewhere. So it's like we have this narrow way of looking at our problem saying, oh, great, we fixed that. But of course, things like people aren't hungry anymore, but now we have obesity. 75% of, it's like a majority of health visits come down to diet, exercise, and then stress and anxiety. All problems that were created because of the convenience that has reduced hunger. Everything, whenever you make one change, there is no vacuum on Earth. You have variables A and B in the lab, but then you release it into the world and you have variables to infinity. So for me, to sum it up, I don't think any of our current solutions are going to fix our problems. I think we will always be a humanity with great problems. And one other element of that, as far as GMOs, I am not completely anti-GMO. What I'm very hesitant against is I think food is a basic human right. And as a substance that gives us life, that allows us to live, I think that should be in the power, the power of that should be in the hands of the people. And so one of the biggest dangers of monocrops, even if it's a healthier monocrop, or putting this through government or corporations, is we just see so much corruption within those. And so to me, one of the most important things is having that power in the hands of the people and not in corporations and governments that have so much ability to be corrupted. For example, it's a vast majority of our GMOs today are run through corrupt corporations such as Monsanto. So my main thing with GMOs is not necessarily, like, science aside, it's just where that is going to be used. So again, that I know I just unloaded a lot of things to your giant unload there, so it's kind of a lot there, but it's just some thoughts.
The there is no answer is definitely the answer. Just to give a specific example, people always assume because I'm a plant-based guy, I think that's the solution, and I definitely did for a few years. I really bought into the whole ideology, and I got really seduced by the idea until I really educated myself. And you realize it's really not that simple. So, like, you're from Wisconsin, right? And I was born in the Midwest. I was born in Minneapolis. There's too many deer there, right? Deer season, they got to get rid of those deer. There's no more great. The wolves aren't there. The wolves aren't taking care of them. There's too many deer. Like, we need hunters, vegan or not vegan. Like, you need wolves, you need hunters. There's way too many deer. Like, it's a problem. The ecosystem is imbalanced. There are invasive species all over the place. It's a huge problem. Idealism goes out the window. Like, things get imbalanced with extinction, but they also get imbalanced with overpopulation. You go on a road at night and there's 20 deer blocking the road. I mean, the wolves are supposed to take care of this, but it's not happening. So my cousins hunt and they'll get a deer for their family, and that's a ton of meat for their family, and that's wild caught meat that's healthy. It's not part of the factory farming system. I'm totally in support of that. You know what I mean? And so this is where things get really nuanced. You have to look at things from a real systems perspective, and what makes sense in the Midwest is very different than what makes sense in Beijing, and very different than what makes sense here in Barcelona. But we just have this retro lens, that this nostalgia. Like here in the Mediterranean, they're just eating fish all the time. The Mediterranean is so crazy dead. There's just not a single fish in there. It's the most fished out body of water I've ever spent time on in my life. And it's time to stop. Like, the fish are dead. You know what I mean? And so I understand it's part of the culture. I understand that it's idealized around the world. There's no more fish in the Med. All the fish are coming from the Atlantic, or they're coming from the Nordics. And it just doesn't make any sense anymore. But we have this romantic ideal of the cottage farmer or whatever it is. Especially with American culture, we have this nostalgia that's so deep. Every American movie is about, high school and your first love and your first car and your football game. It's like all that stuff is gone. It's all gone. And the chicken, pigs, and cows and the soy and the corn and the rice, it's not going to work. It's a really uncomfortable conversation to say, like, maybe we need to think about mussels, for example. They sequester carbon. They're really efficient. They clean up the ocean. They're not that delicious. Nobody really likes them. But let's talk about mussels. Maybe we need to talk about insects. Maybe we need to talk about algae. Maybe we need to talk about like stuff that's really, Al Gore has his famous film, The Inconvenient Truth. I was like, he didn't talk about anything inconvenient in that film. Here's the inconvenient stuff. Like, dudes like you need to sit around eating roadkill and strapping garbage. That's inconvenient. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Standing up.
That documentary was definitely very limited, and that was one of my main things with that. And one thing is, I completely agree with what you're saying there. Nothing is black and white. Like you look at veganism, and it's so often this black and white mindset that it's the most sustainable way and it's the only sustainable way. And I actually did think that way for a little while when I was plant-based for 2 years. But then I realized some situations plant-based is the most sustainable, others not. And this idea that it's going to work for the 7 billion, that's that black and white mindset is one of the greatest problems of our time, is that we think that everything's simple, but everything is incredibly complex. There's a million moving parts to everything. And I think that's one of the most important things that we need to do if we're talking about solutions is critical thinking, also rational, logical thinking, but just always coming at things from a much bigger perspective and not, making one example all of a sudden and then extrapolating out because of that one example saying this is the way the whole world is. It's different everywhere.
It's so hard not to fall in love with an idea, not to fall in love with ideologies. I'm so prone to radicalization, and I think people really are now, especially with online media and stuff like that. And it just doesn't really speak or inform the middle, which is 80+%, whether we're talking about political leaning or food choices or anything. And the question is, how do we shape the middle? And I don't really know, but tell us about some of the weirdest foods that you ate in the past year. I know I saw a picture of some roadkill. Tell us about some of the weirdest stuff that you never thought you'd eat before.
Sure. Well, actually, just 2 days ago, I had acorn grubs that I fried, which was, you gather the acorns, you let the acorns sit, and then the grubs come out, and then you eat them. And they're actually really tasty. They taste like an acorn. Basically, when it comes to insects, most insects taste like the thing they consume. So grasshoppers taste like grass, and, earthworms taste like dirt, and acorn grubs taste like acorn, and dung beetles taste like poop, basically. They're not good. I haven't eaten those for 10 years. But so that was an interesting thing. As far as the deer hit on the side of the road, that was always my plan, was to harvest a deer that was hit by the side of the road, because talk about sustainable for that situation. It's extremely sustainable to harvest something that would have gone to waste otherwise. So that's actually been that. I haven't really eaten red meat hardly at all for the last 5 years, but that for this project has been truly amazing, and it feels great for my body. I've actually grown and foraged over 300 species of foods in the last year, so almost a new species every day almost. And my goal was to grow or forage over 250 different species. So I exceeded that. I have to say that the nature is really abundant. One of my problems is there's so much food out there, I can't stop thinking about it. I mean, in northern Wisconsin right now, for example, there's just maybe hundreds of thousands of pounds of apples. Just nature really does provide. Now, that's a simple statement, and of course it is far more complex. But for a lot of people who, would have expected me to, my body just to dwindle away, that is the reality where they don't realize that everything we're eating ultimately does go back to nature in one way or another. And the earth does provide. It is a beautiful world out there, and it's also a delicious world out there.
I always think of systems thinking, how one thing really relates to another, and the biodiversity of nature. Really, to me, the importance of biodiversity for ecosystems, for nutrition, for health of our soil, for even just visually, aesthetically, it's beautiful. It's the same kind of diversity that we need in our world, and monocropping and monothinking, and ideas being siloed, people being thrown into identity politics, and people being thrown into ideological ways of living and things like this. I just can't see that being the future. And so but it seems like people are really getting funneled in terms of, I know they're getting funneled in terms of what they eat, and I see people getting funneled more and more in terms of what they think, because our media sources, despite the fact that we have more media available than ever, people are seeing a very, very limited view of reality in terms of what's going on. And the hunger one is one that you brought up, and I think it's such an important one. Guys like me, it was a kid in the 80s, and we had fundraisers for Ethiopia, and people were starving, and it was a huge problem back in the 80s. It's not a big problem anymore, and homeless people, the bigger problem is obesity, and people haven't really gotten this message. They haven't really heard. There's African swine flu is happening right now. Nobody's talking about this. There's millions of pigs being eradicated. Why? Because we have no biodiversity in our food system. It's not that there's anything wrong with eating pigs, but probably something really wrong with having billions of genetically identical animals all over the world, and nobody's even talking about it anymore. And so this kind of information, I think, is really, really spooky, where people aren't talking about these massive, massive apocalypses which are happening, whether it's the million pigs being buried in China, whether it's the bees dying off in North America, these systems that are truly falling apart, or the Mediterranean being completely fished out. Like, it's really happening in real time. And I don't know that the fallout will be gradual. I feel like the fallout could just be something massive, on the order of like every cow dies in the U.S. in a period of 6 months. That is not inconceivable. Or every single chicken must be killed because of some bird virus or something like that. This is totally possible. And I just don't think these kinds of, like I said, inconvenient truths are really being discussed. It's really a lot of ideology, like, hey, let's go back to Grandma and Grandpa's time when everybody had a backyard and a blueberry patch and this kind of stuff, when really we're playing with some stuff that's really, really dangerous.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's pretty basic. We're going to have catastrophes. That's just the way things go. And the way that we've been designing things, where we just outsource and outsource and outsource, what we do is we're just building up these catastrophes in a very unintelligent way, and they're gonna come. I don't know which ones they're going to be exactly, but with the amount of things that we have going on, they're absolutely going to come. The thing that humanity has going for it really well right now is that we're able to outsource those things, where when we have one catastrophe, we have the ability to consume resources from another area or pull in resources from another area to deal with that catastrophe. But the question is, at what point will we not have those resources to help out in that situation? And then the catastrophes start to become, real catastrophes. And will that happen in our lifetime? Will that happen in, a few lifetimes from now? I don't really know, but I think it's safe to say it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
So you've turned your life upside down for the past year. I'm guessing there was some fallout in terms of friends and relationships and family and things like that. What's next for you? Are you going to put things back together? Are you going to move into a bigger home? Or how do you begin to unravel something like this, which I'm sure had pretty massive effects on your lifestyle, your outlook, your social group, and everything?
Well, I've been doing these sort of projects for quite a while now. I started, my first big project was in 2013, so I guess it's been about 6 years, and my family and friends know me as someone who does these sorts of things. So, there's that element, obviously growing and foraging all of my food means I'm not eating other people's meals and going out to eat. So there's that element of the social isolation, which has certainly been a challenge, but the social elements, it's not nearly as important to me as the immersive life, the living the life to my fullest. I mean, you go to, if you talk about, like, say, Thoreau being in the woods for years, sure, he missed out on some social elements, but what did he gain? A far deeper connection with the land. So for me, I've actually managed to maintain a really good relationship with family and friends. I just spent 7 weeks up in northern Wisconsin with my mom, and we didn't eat together, but we played board games together, and we went for walks, and we slept in the same house, and we had a nice time. So I've managed to live a life that I do these really extreme things, but I don't tell anybody what to do. I do my thing, they do their thing. If I can positively inspire them, great. If not, there's 7 other billion people that I have the opportunity to positively inspire. So because I don't care what any individual person does, even if I'm attached to them, like it's my mom or my brother, it doesn't matter. My goal is to wake up people, whoever that is. And the way that I look at it is there's millions of people or billions of people that are on the fence, that are waking up realizing that they're not living the life they want, and they're going to bed with that pit in their stomach. Those are the people that I'm really sending this message out to. It's people that know already or have an idea that things aren't right, and they want to be a part of the change. That's my focus. And so that really makes life easy for me too, because I don't have to harp on anyone. I don't have to nag anyone. I just do my thing, which I immerse in these projects because I love them myself, but also because they can affect positive change and wake people up. So yeah, when this project's over in just less than a month, I think I'll wake up and it'll be the same day as, the day before, and there'll be minor changes, but overall it'll be pretty darn similar.
And do you have plans for where you live? Will you change your living setup? Are you going to change, do you have a new book or a new project, or you haven't gotten that far yet?
Yeah, after this year is over, I'm going to be doing a world solutions tour, world speaking tour, and that will be, I'll be traveling for about a year through the United States, Central America, Europe, Asia, probably Australia, New Zealand. Not exactly sure where yet, but all of those places should be in there. And what I'll be doing is I'll be doing speaking, but I'll also be showing what I see as great solutions to world problems. And not, of course, solutions to all of our problems, but going out there and showcasing what I see as people, organizations that are really working on our problems, but not hacking at the branches of the tree, but actually working on the roots to our problems. So I'll be showcasing those and supporting those and learning from them as I'm traveling, as I'm speaking and sharing. So that will be me. That's kind of my 2020 plans. And during that, of course, it's going to be different. I don't have a garden in front of me, so I won't be able to eat all food that I grow or forage. But my plan is still to be very focused on eating a very balanced, healthy diet and trying to source as much local, unprocessed, unpackaged food as I go, and spend times in gardens. I'll be staying at communities so I can live in a more connected way, not necessarily always staying in the heart of cities, but spending plenty of time out in nature as well. So it's kind of the idea for what's coming up.
Sounds great. Well, I appreciate your work and I appreciate your projects. I think, a big part, like you mentioned, is just planting ideas in people's head of another way and looking at things a different way. I talked to a guy in Chicago just about an hour ago on the phone, just a student, and he was saying, hey, this is my year. I'm going to lose 80 pounds. And I was like, that's great. And he's like, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. What do you think? I was like, all of it sounds great. Do it. And I just, where did he get that idea? I don't know. Somehow he was listening to my stuff and he got this idea. I don't talk about losing 80 pounds, and at least I haven't in a long time. But I think people listening to this might hear about eating roadkill or eating, acorn maggots or acorn grubs or whatever they are. Yeah, acorn grubs. And it might put an idea in their head that maybe the future for them is not chicken, pigs, and cows, and corn and rice and wheat and soy, and maybe the future looks a little different. It might encourage them to go out and exercise differently, or get a different kind of job, or just think about things differently. And again, that this siloing of ideas, this siloing of food, this mono idea world that we're living, it seems like a big problem. So I appreciate you standing out and really committing to these projects, and great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, it's been great to be on, and maybe we'll do it again in a few years after more wild things have happened. And hey, who knows what life will be like in a couple of years.
Sounds great. And Rob, where should we send people to follow what you're up to when you're on your tour? I'm sure some people want to come connect with you.
Yeah, so Instagram is where I'm really active right now, and that's just at Rob J. Greenfield. And then youtube.com/Rob Greenfield. I have videos about this project and what's to come. I will also have a book out on this project next year, and you can go to robgreenfield.tv/foodfreedombook, and that's where you can sign up to get a notification when it comes out.
When I first started practicing yoga back in 2002, I was so stiff. I couldn't touch my toes. My fingers would come about halfway down my shins. When I sat on the floor, my knees were way up off the ground, my hips were so tight, and back bends were totally impossible. When I extended my arms above my head, that was already a really deep back bend for me. So I was really frustrated, and all my yoga teachers told me that yoga was not about flexibility, that I was focusing on the wrong things. And I got really frustrated because that was easy for them to say, they were already flexible. I was really struggling, and everything I did in yoga was about flexibility, because every single thing, whether it was sitting on the floor or any kind of basic forward bend, standing pose, anything really, I couldn't even begin to practice because I was so locked up. And so I started doing a lot of research. I started talking to a lot of people outside of the yoga community, specifically gymnasts and dancers, and people who are a little more comfortable talking about mobility training. And very quickly, I started to learn that in order to make flexibility gains, you really need to supplement your yoga practice. And even the yoga teachers I talked to who were very flexible, who developed it later in life, when I actually saw behind the curtains what was going on, all of them were doing supplemental stretching in the evening. And there were some things that all of these people, whether it was the gymnasts or the dancers or the yoga teachers who had discovered flexibility later in life, the things that I found consistently were they were doing practice outside of their practice, meaning supplemental stretching. All of them were using long hold passive stretches. And then very quickly I learned how to add a couple of other interesting things onto that practice, including breathing and time under passive tension. And essentially I came up with a protocol that really helps you to open up your body. I call it gravity yoga. I've been teaching it now for 12 years, something like that. And it's really, really effective for hamstrings, for locked up hips, for a stiff back, shoulders. And we've been teaching it to students all over the world. We teach it in my studios here in Barcelona. It's a very, very popular class. And for the first time ever, I'm having a gravity yoga teacher training. And it's an online program that teaches you how to work with clients in a 60-minute guided class, or how to work with athletes or CrossFitters or yoga students who are stuck in short bursts to supplement whatever else they're doing. So you can work privately or in yoga studios, fitness centers. I'm really excited about this program. It's heavy on anatomy and biomechanics. We dive deep into sequencing. We walk you through pose by pose exactly how to teach this, and we also give you all the why behind the how. It's really a great program. To learn more, go to gravityyogatraining.com. Course starts soon. I'm super excited. This week's nutritional tip comes from listener Kelly. Kelly says, Lucas, I'm an avid hot yoga student. I go at least 4 or 5 times a week, and I also try to run on off days. I worry and I feel like I'm always dehydrated. My bowels are normal and everything seems fine, but I still feel dried out, if that makes any sense. What should I do? So I owned my very first yoga studio was a hot yoga studio. I ran one of the larger hot yoga training programs in the world for over a decade. And so I have tons of experience with this. And for hot yoga instructors, they're constantly struggling with hydration. For those of you who don't know, hot yoga, 90 minutes, 40 to 42 degrees Celsius, 100 plus degrees Fahrenheit for 90 minutes doing yoga. Doing yoga in a sauna is basically what we're talking about. You lose tons of water. In many cases, people lose multiple pounds of weight in a single class. It's not real weight, it's water weight. But where does that water go? Well, it goes under your towel on the floor, and you need to replenish that. It's not as simple as just guzzling water. It doesn't really stick. A couple of tricks from hot yoga land. One is to add something to your water. A little bit of apple cider vinegar, a little bit of sea salt, and a little bit of lemon. Any combination thereof, one, all three, whatever works for you. That's something that people use. If you're doing that kind of activity too, you do just have to you really have to spread out your hydration. So you can't just hydrate before class, and you can't just hydrate after class. As you've mentioned, you just kind of feel dry. It just doesn't really stick. You almost just drink and pee. And so you have to get in the habit of drinking more. The biggest hack for this is really just keeping bottles of water available. And what I found really effective, I've done this for years, is having glass bottles of water. Somehow it's really appetizing. And so in my home, in my office, and in both places where I end up staying, I have glass bottles, big sort of old-fashioned milk bottles that are filled with drinking water. And I have them always. And if I put one on my desk and it's a liter, it's 1 liter of water, I will drink the entire thing, and I'll fill it back up, and I'll drink the entire thing, and not in any kind of forced way, but just in a very natural way. Same thing if you ever go to a restaurant where they serve water, if in a jug, if they put a big jug or carafe of water on the table, it always gets emptied, and it's just appetizing. It's there. And so I think the biggest thing is making it available. I know a lot of you carry around plastic bottles of water. It's a mental thing. It's kind of gross to drink out of a plastic water bottle, even if you're not consciously thinking about it. It's not super appetizing. Something about a glass bottle with water and a glass to drink out of, never fail, people drink it. It's like every time I have a meeting or someone comes to the house or whatever it is, you pull up the glass bottle, put some glasses down, everybody just drinks all the water. And they don't need encouragement. They don't need to keep track of 8 glasses a day or anything like that. So that would be my biggest suggestion, as someone who's, again, has spent a bunch of time living in the tropics and a bunch of time super dehydrated and a bunch of time in hot yoga rooms, is get some glass water bottles and stash them in all the places where you end up. So your kitchen table, your desk, wherever you end up, and see if that doesn't help you get a couple of liters, not just right before and after hot yoga class, but also throughout the day. Hope that's helpful. We have a question this week from longtime listener Aubrey. Aubrey says, I've been struggling with my relationship with alcohol since my father passed away in 2016. I quit drinking cold turkey in January. We were on a holiday, and I was pleasantly surprised to realize that I didn't have a drinking problem. I just thought I did, so I decided to experiment and see what it would be like if I stopped completely. I didn't have a hard time at all. It didn't bother me, and honestly, I didn't really think about it. My friends couldn't wrap their heads around it. It was exactly like you and Annie described in the episode. They immediately assumed something had happened and that I had a problem. I found myself withdrawing from my social circle and doing lots of new things on my own. I rediscovered yoga, I started a business, and I was actually more happy on my own. I became a person that enjoyed my time much more than I enjoyed time with people. At the end of May, I was away on a work trip for 3 days in Washington, D.C., and I wanted a glass of wine, so I had one. It turned into 2. The next day, I had a cocktail with lunch. That evening at a social network, I ended up having several glasses of cheap, crappy wine. I remember thinking, why the hell am I doing this? Aubrey goes on to explain that she kind of spun out, and she's at her 35th birthday, having some marital challenges, gaining weight, not wanting to get out of bed, just drinking and watching TV, and wondering where things went wrong. I don't have any educational or clinical background with addiction, only personal insight and personal reading, and of course family stuff like we all do. There's an author that I'd recommend you check out, Johan Hari. I think I'm saying his name right. He's usually in the UK, so maybe he calls it Johan, but I think it's Johan Hari. I think it's a Swedish name. And he's about my age, and he wrote a book called Lost Connections. A little bit of a controversial guy. He's gotten into trouble for some plagiarism, but I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. His book, Lost Connections, and his talks about addiction are excellent. And his theory is that the opposite of addiction, the opposite of substance abuse, is not sobriety, it's connection. And it's just really a simple truth for me that has really rang true. And especially when I'm reading this, I'm hearing you saying that as you got sober, you isolated. As you got sober, you got into yoga and business and isolation and happiness and empowering, and all that stuff is really, really great, but we cannot take on the world alone. And most of us try. I try pretty much every week, and I fail miserably. It's really hard. Life's hard. I don't know why. I have 3 great kids. I have a business that I love. I have an amazing life, and I struggle just like you struggle. And you're traveling. You mentioned you're in DC and you're in New York, and you have a great business, and you're living on the lake, and all of these things sound wonderful, and yet you struggle. Why do we struggle? I don't know. But this concept of lost connections is definitely playing a role. At least it is for me. We're lonely, and we're alone, and we're not wired to be that way. We're social animals, and any time that we go up against that, there are very, very real repercussions. So I don't have any advice or words of wisdom, just empathize with your situation. And I encourage you to check out that book, Lost Connections. And if anybody knows the author, see if you can get him on the show. I've been trying to write to him, haven't been able to get in touch. I would love to have him on the show to talk about this sobriety versus lost connections concept. I just think it's really, really simple and genius and has been really insightful for me. Hope that's helpful. Aubrey.
This week's iTunes review is by CJP808 from USA. CJP808 says, I've been a yoga instructor for 7 years, and it's rare to come across so much practical advice in the often woo-woo world of yoga. Lucas offers a very positive and rational perspective about yoga, diet, and movement that can apply to anyone from the beginner level all the way to advanced. Most importantly, he walks the walk and lives by the standards that he displays in these podcasts. I haven't come across a boring episode yet. If you are an active yoga practitioner, or if you're just beginning, you're doing yourself a favor by increasing your knowledge with this podcast. Lucas, you're an inspiration. Thanks to you and your team for all you do. Thanks, CJP808. You have won the Yoga Trapeze. Email us at podcast@yogabody.com and we'll ship it to you.
If you're a regular Yoga Talk Show listener, you'll definitely want to get on my email list. Go to yogabody.com/sign me up. When you enter your email address there, we always have free giveaways every month. Yoga straps, water bottles, discounts in our shop, and all kinds of other things. When you sign up at yogabody.com/sign me up, I'll send you just one email a week with updates about the show, special offers, new courses, and valuable information that I think you'll find useful. So go to yogabody.com/sign me up to claim your free prize now.